Hello students, welcome to the lecture on conflict management, and after this lecture we will be able to learn the following objectives. Explain the definition of conflict, define the changing view of conflict, understand the sources of organizational conflict, describe the level or forms of conflict, define the stages of conflict and outcomes of conflict, understand the causes of conflict, discuss the conflict management strategies, explain the conflict negotiation and its process. Let's start with the concept of conflict management. The process of limiting the negative aspects of conflict while increasing the positive aspects of conflict is known as conflict management. The goal of conflict management is to enhance learning and group outcomes, including effectiveness or performance in organization setting. Properly managed conflict can improve group outcomes. Conflict resolution contains the reduction, elimination, or termination of all forms and types of conflict. When people talk about conflict resolution, they tend to use terms like negotiation, bargaining, mediation, or arbitration. Businesses can benefit from appropriate types and levels of conflict. That is the aim of conflict management and not the aim of conflict resolution. Conflict management does not imply conflict resolution. Conflict is a characteristic of human existence. It is part of the dynamic of life that drives us into the future. Let us now discuss the definition of conflict. Conflict has characteristics of its own, and it is possible to analyze its structure and behavior. When conflict is understood, it is easier to find ways to predict it, prevent it, transform it, and resolve it. Whether in far-reaching international diplomacy or the immediate response to a local crisis, developing successful alternatives to violent conflict requires firm command of the practice of negotiation. It is the expression of disagreement over something important to both or all sides of a dispute. The first important thing to grasp is that it is entirely dependent on the people involved. It depends on their having a particular point of view in which may or may not have independent facts and evidence to support it, and how they behave when they encounter an opposing point of view. Violence is the only one kind of conflict behavior, of course.
What is it about conflict that makes it so difficult to deal with, and how come good people can turn into such monsters in the face of conflict? The most common way of dealing with conflict is to avoid it. Some people walk away, others get really upset, wind themselves up and attack, and others just get sick or go on stress leave. In fact, it's amazing what people will do in order to avoid conflict and the emotional stress that comes with it. There is a very clever saying that goes like this: denial is not a river in Egypt. Denial is, however, one of the most common problems when it comes to resolving conflict. When confronted with a tense or difficult conflict, too many people smooth it over, bury their head in the sand, and the conflict goes on for another 1, 2, or 3 weeks, months, or even years in some cases. I want to introduce you to a definition of conflict and then give you a pathway for the resolution of conflict. Before I do, I want to say this. For some people, even the word conflict means warfare, dead bodies and blood on the streets, and it's very common for women and men to see anything less than that as not being in conflict at all. So this is a definition that starts at a very low level, because most conflict starts out as very small upsets and builds and grows into a full-scale battle. So here's the definition. Conflict exists when one person has a need of another and that need is not being met. Now, don't be fooled by the simplicity of this definition. The resolution of conflict starts from here, and the first step is to express the need. The second step is to find out if the need can or cannot be met. If the need can be met, then we have resolution. If it's a no, then we negotiate to resolve the conflict, or we go into the management of conflict. So here's the problem. Most people go straight from having an unmet need into the management of conflict, bypassing step 1 and step 2 because they are afraid and don't talk to the people who can do something about it. And that's not pretty. In fact, it gets quite ugly. So here's what the management of conflict looks like: sulking, withdrawing, getting sick, the silent treatment, backstabbing, gossiping, shouting, blocking, being aggressive, and getting angry. So the resolution of conflict starts with expressing your unmet need and then finding out if your unmet need can or cannot be met. If your conflict has escalated to the stage where it's too tough or sensitive or difficult to handle, then you really need to think seriously about involving a neutral third party to help you mediate the dispute, and we can help you out with that.
A conflict exists when two people wish to carry out acts which are mutually inconsistent. Team conflict. Managing conflict in teams can be challenging as a number of people are involved. Again, destructive conflict can be minimized by investing time in the early stages. Characteristics of conflict. Conflicts are a reality. Any organization that is experiencing conflict within the organization has a choice. Conflict can destroy the organization, or this can be an opportunity to create a new direction for the team. The choice is up to the team. 8 basic characteristics of conflict. Conflicts do not just appear, conflicts evolve. Conflict is like a virus. When it appears, it begins to spread like crazy. Conflicts are bred by different values. Conflict is energized through opposing interests. Most important characteristic of social conflicts. Conflicts is a conscious activity. Individuals and groups who are involved in conflicts try to defeat each of the other consciously. It is a deliberate attempt to oppose. Everyone harms the other party knowingly. Conflict is a personal activity. Conflict is a personal activity. The main objective is to defeat the opponent party. The conflicting parties personally know each other. Conflict is intermittent. Conflict is not a continuous process. It takes place occasionally. It occurs all on a sudden and comes to an end after some time. Classification of cyber conflict. Few international humanitarian law topics are providing as problematic in modern warfare as classification of conflict. That is, the identification of the type of conflict to which particular hostilities amount as a matter of law. Classifying the conflict in question is always the first step in any international humanitarian law analysis, for the nature of the conflict determines the applicable legal regime. Accordingly, classification is a subject of seminal importance. Now moving on to the next topic, we will study the changing view of conflict. In the past decade, a number of United Nations reports, including the study by Graça Machel on the impact of armed conflict on children, review report have noted with concern the fact that the character and tactics of war are changing. These changes have created new and unprecedented threats to child, terrorism and counterterrorism. Both terrorist attacks and counterterrorism measures have had a deep impact on children. Terrorist attacks disproportionately target civilians in hitherto sacrosanct locations such as schools, hospitals, and other public places. Children are also increasingly being used to perpetrate these attacks, even as suicide bombers in some locations. Diversity of armed actors. The character of armed actors is increasingly more diverse and difficult to define. Those include government forces, rebel groups, paramilitary and proxy forces, etc. Political motivation, criminality, and asset wars. Closely related to the grey area in which criminality and politically motivated action intersect is the phenomenon of asset or resource wars, where conflict often revolves around the control of natural resources. Change. Conflict accelerates change in an organization, especially in small business, where it is easy to formulate and implement new policies. Conflict prompts modification of policies and operation procedures in the organization. In case of extreme conflict, the organization may conduct a complete overhaul of its leadership, bringing in managers with fresh ideas. Goal congruence. A review of the goals and objectives of the business to meet the needs of conflicting parties may result into achievement of goal congruence and coherence in operations. Employees, departments, and groups are interdependent within the organization. Competition for scarce resources is a major source of conflict due to different interests, waste of time and resources. The business may lose precious time and resources at the times of conflict. Instead of concentrating on meeting their objectives, employees waste time on divisive issues. Misuse of business materials and funds is quite rampant when conflicting parties engage in warfare. Wrangles, stress, and emotional confrontations reduce the workers' productivity and eventually the profitability of the business. Let's know the sources of organizational conflict. There are 6 basic sources of organizational conflict. Organizational structure. Conflict tends to take different forms depending upon the organizational structure. For example, if a company uses a matrix structure as its organizational form, it will have decisional conflict built in because the structure specifies that each manager reports to 2 bosses. For example, global company ABB Incorporation is organized around a matrix structure based on the dimensions of country and industry. This structure can lead to confusion as the company is divided geographically into 1200 different units and by industry into 50 different units. Limited resources. Resources such as money, time, and equipment are often scarce. Competition among people or departments for limited resources is a frequent cause for conflict. For example, cutting-edge laptops and gadgets such as a BlackBerry or iPhone are expensive resources that may be allocated to employees on a need-to-have basis in some companies. Task interdependence. Another cause of conflict is task interdependence. What is when accomplishment of a goal requires reliance on others to perform the tasks. For example, if we are tasked with creating advertising for our product, are dependent on the creative team to design the words and lay out, the photographer or videographer to create the visuals, the media buyer to purchase the advertising space, and so on. The completion of our goal is dependent on others. Incompatible goals. Sometimes conflict arises when 2 parties think that their goals are mutually exclusive. Within an organization, incompatible goals often arise because of the different ways department managers are compensated. Personality differences. Personality differences among co-workers are common. By understanding some fundamental differences among the way people think and act, we can better understand how others see the world. Communication problems. Sometimes conflict arises simply out of a small, unintentional communication problem, such as lost emails or dealing with people who do not return phone calls. Giving feedback is also a case in which the best intentions can quickly escalate into a conflict situation. When communicating, be sure to focus on behavior and its effects, not on the person.
You know, every time you're late, I have to pick up your slack.
I'm sorry, I've got a lot going on right now. Anyway, it was 10 minutes. Is it really that big of a deal?
It was 20 minutes, and yes, it is a big deal. How about I start leaving 20 minutes early, and you can see what it's like to have 20 minutes worth of extra work to do.
I said I was sorry. What more do you want from me?
How about a real apology for one thing, and maybe then you can start coming in on time.
How about you stop making such a big deal out of one little mistake?
Wow, you are so not gonna last here. Thank you. You know, every time you're late, I have to pick up your slack.
My mornings have been really tough with the kids lately. I'm sorry that's affected you.
Well, you're gonna have to get that figured out because that was just 20 minutes of covering both phones.
I really am sorry. I've been there before and I know what a drag it is.
Yeah, it's really stressful.
I promise I'll be on time from now on.
I'd appreciate that.
Levels of conflict or forms of conflict. Conflict can occur at a number of levels of human functioning. Conflict in your head between opposing motives or ideas is shown by your internal dialogue and is at the intrapersonal level. Beyond that, the primary concern here is with social conflict. That is, conflict between people, whether they are acting as individuals, as members of groups, or as representatives of organizations or nations. Interpersonal conflict. It occurs when 2 people have incompatible needs, goals, or approaches in their relationship. Communication breakdown is often an important source of interpersonal conflict, and learning communication skills is valuable in preventing and resolving such difficulties. At the same time, very real differences occur between people that cannot be resolved by any amount of improved communication. Personality conflict refers to very strong differences in motives, values, or styles in dealing with people that are not resolvable. For example, if both parties in a relationship have a high need for power and both want to be dominant in the relationship, there is no way for both to be satisfied and a power struggle ensues. Role conflict. It involves very real differences in role definitions, expectations, or responsibilities between individuals who are interdependent in a social system. If there are ambiguities in role definitions in an organization or unclear boundaries of responsibilities, then the stage is set for interpersonal friction between the persons involved. Unfortunately, the conflict is often misdiagnosed as interpersonal conflict rather than role conflict, and resolution is then complicated and misdirected. Intergroup conflict. It occurs when collections of people, such as ethnic or racial groups, departments, or levels of decision making in the same organization and union and management. Multi-party conflict. It occurs in societies when different interest groups and organizations have varying priorities over resource management and policy development. These complex conflicts typically involve a combination of economic, value, and power resources. This complexity is often beyond the reach of traditional authoritative or adversarial procedures, and more collaborative approaches to building consensus are required for resolution. International conflict. It occurs between two states at the global level. Competition for resources certainly plays a part, but value and power conflict are often intertwined with sometimes predominant. Stages of conflict. The conflict process can be seen as comprising 5 stages: potential opposition or incompatibility, cognition and personalization, intentions, behavior, outcome. Stage 1. Potential opposition or incompatibility. The first step in the conflict process is the presence on conditions that create opportunities for conflicts to rise. These cause or create opportunities for conflict to rise. These causes or sources of conflict have been condensed into 3 general categories. Stage 2. Cognition and personalization. Conflict must be perceived by the parties to it. Whether or not conflict exists is a perception issue. Stage 3. Intentions. Intentions are decisions to act in a given way. Intentions intervene between people's perceptions and emotions and their overt behavior. Stage 4. Behavior. This is a stage where conflict becomes visible. The behavior stage includes the statements, actions, and reactions made by the conflicting parties. These conflict behaviors are usually overt attempts to implement each party's intentions. Stage 5. Outcome. The action-reaction interplay between the conflicting parties result in consequences. These outcomes may be functional in that the conflict results in an improvement in the group's performance, or dysfunctional in that it hinders group performance. Outcomes of conflicts. One of the most common outcomes of conflict is that it upsets parties in the short run. However, conflict can have both positive and negative outcomes. On the positive side, conflict can result in greater creativity or better decisions. For example, as a result of a disagreement over a policy, a manager may learn from an employee that newer technologies help solve problems in an unanticipated way. Positive outcomes include the following: consideration of a broader range of ideas, resulting in a better, stronger idea; surfacing of assumptions that may be inaccurate; increased participation and creativity; clarification of individual views that build learning. On the other hand, conflict can be dysfunctional. if it is excessive or involves personal attacks or underhanded tactics. Examples of negative outcomes include the following: increased stress and anxiety among individuals, which decreases productivity and satisfaction; feelings of being defeated and demeaned, which lowers individuals' morale and may increase turnover. Positive outcomes of conflict: increased motivation and creativity, healthy interactions or involvement stimulated, number of identified alternatives increased, increased understanding of others. The negative outcomes of conflict are decreased productivity, relevant information not being shared, unpleasant emotional experiences, environmental stress. Causes of conflict. There are many causes of conflict. Recognizing these causes is the first step in dealing with conflict situations. Different values can lead to conflicts. When people have different values, conflicts can result. If one of your personal values in life is that your family comes first, and if your boss's personal value is that work comes first, conflict can be the result. When they ask you to stay late at work or to give up a planned family vacation due to project deadlines. Making assumptions, that can lead to conflicts. If the husband assumes that his wife will have a hot meal waiting for him when he gets home from work, after all he works so hard at bringing home the bacon, and when that hot meal is not ready, conflict between the husband and wife can result. Deferring expectations can lead to conflict. We expect people to know things without us telling them. What do you mean they cannot read our minds? Well, they should be able to. Is that not obvious? Well, no. A lot of things are not obvious to many people.
Let's begin with a definition from Webster's on the word conflict. Webster's defines conflict in the verb tense as to come into collision or disagreement, be contradictory, at variance, or in opposition, clash, to fight or contend, do battle. When used as a noun, conflict is defined as a fight, battle, or struggle, especially a prolonged struggle or strife. Regardless of whether we consider conflict as a noun or a verb, it is nothing pleasant to engage in. In the converse, conflict can be useful since it can cause entities to engage and grow through mediation and communication. Sometimes conflict is the intersection of ideas that initially clash with each other, but ultimately are able to merge and morph into something more substantial. This positive aspect of conflict can only occur through the engagement and management of conflict when it does occur. Often when the root cause of the conflict is sufficiently identified, we are then able to solution the conflict. Oddly enough, as many conflicts as occur on a daily basis around the world, I would submit to you that there are only 8 basic or common causes of conflict. Let's take a look at what those 8 common causes of conflict are. According to psychologists Art Bell and Bret Hart, there are 8 common causes of conflict in the workplace. The 8 causes are conflicting resources, conflicting styles, conflicting perceptions, conflicting goals, conflicting pressures, conflicting roles, different personal values, and unpredictable policies. Let's take a closer look at each of these individually. Cause of conflict number 1, conflicting resources. Everyone needs resource no matter what type of work you are engaged in. It can be construction equipment, office supplies, meeting space, even staff assistance. Anything required to get a job done is considered a resource. The problem, however, is when more than one entity at a time needs the same resource. When that happens, conflict can occur. Cause of conflict number 2, conflicting styles. People approach work differently. In fact, this is such an important determining factor in how people get along that Kathy Kolbe created a series of cognitive assessments that determine how a person approaches getting work done. Some people like to wait to the last minute and rush a project or work activity, while others like to have a step-by-step, minute-by-minute approach to getting work done. Neither is right or wrong, just different. Cause of conflict number 3, conflicting perceptions. It is often said that perceptions, while possible to be incorrect, are a person's reality. As such, for every person in the world looking at a situation, there can be that many perceptions about that one situation, occurrence, or event. To make it more exasperating, we also must factor in that some individuals have more insight into a situation either through experience or subject matter knowledge. Cause of conflict number 4, conflicting goals. If we were to rank the 8 conflict causes, I would suggest that this one would be close to the top of the list, as I regularly see this in my relationship alignment work as one of the pervasive causes for conflict and relationship dysfunction. In organizational relationships, one organization must have the goal of outsourcing and saving money, but additionally getting as much free service from the service provider as possible. On the other hand, the other organization may have the goal of delivering outsourcing services, but increasing the amount of revenue generated from the customer. As a result, while they both agreed on a contract and a price and a set of services, both partners in the relationship have unstated goals which are in conflict with each other. Cause of conflict number 5, conflicting pressures. To introduce this cause of conflict, we use a familiar phrase often heard in society these days: poor planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine. Many times we have to count on assistance from others to get tasks accomplished, and many times due to the hectic nature of work and fewer people in the workforce, our priorities do not match the priorities or urgency of others. As a result, when our project is going to suffer delays because of someone else's inability to support our efforts to completion, conflict occurs. Cause of conflict number 6, conflicting roles. To introduce this cause of conflict, we use another commonly heard phrase: too many cooks spoil the broth. In organizations that are well balanced, most roles have no overlap, and thereby making areas of responsibility very crisp and clear. However, in this day of matrix organizational structures, along with the scurrying around to get work done after resources have been let go, there can be overlap of roles. When this occurs, it can appear that one person is infringing on someone else's territory. When this happens, 99% of the time, it creates conflict. Note, sometimes one person just wants responsibility for a task or assignment, even if they have no logical connection to the task. This generates enormous conflict. Cause of conflict number 7, different personal values. Here's another tough situation that can create very difficult conflict. On occasion, a manager may ask an employee to do something that conflicts with the employee's ethical or moral values. One time I was asked to add additional charges to a client's bill by doing tasks that the customer did not ask for, and then charging them for the work on the invoice after the fact. That was a tremendous conflict for me in the moment. You want to be successful in your job, but at what price? When work conflicts with our personal values, like in this example, conflict can quickly arise. Cause of conflict number 8, unpredictable policies. When rules and policies change at work and you don't communicate that change clearly to your team, confusion and conflict can occur. In addition, if you fail to apply workplace policies consistently with members of your team, the disparity in treatment can also become a source.
Conflict management strategies. Different people use different strategies for managing conflict. When they become engaged in a conflict, there are two major concerns that have to take into account. Achieving our personal goals. You are in conflict because you have a goal that conflicts with another person's goal. Keeping a good relationship with the other person. Or we may not be able to interact effectively with the person in the future. Conflict negotiation. Conflict negotiation is a back and forth communication process designed to anticipate, contain and resolve disputes so that parties with some shared and some opposing interests can reach mutually acceptable solutions. Conflict negotiation refers to a voluntary two-way communication in which parties involved control both the process and the outcome. Conflict negotiation involves 5 key components: the parties involved, the interests involved, the relationship between the parties, the interactions throughout the negotiation process.
Life and relationships will inevitably have some rough spots. There may be an issue at work, or a conflict with a parent, spouse, or child. Hopefully, as we go through life, we will develop the skills to resolve these issues in healthy ways. What is unhealthy is taking things too personally and reacting with anger, resentment, and judgment. All this does is to escalate the situation, creating more things for both sides to feel upset about. If this is a pattern that exists between two people, they likely have the sense that they have the same argument over and over, but nothing ever gets resolved. If we are blaming someone for making us feel a certain way, it is unlikely resolution will come, because we cannot make others responsible for how we feel. We have a better chance of finding resolution if we target specific behaviors and set boundaries around those. If we say, "I do not want you to talk to me like that anymore," the person does have the power to honor our request. If he or she agrees and keeps to that agreement, then there is resolution. If we say, "You just do not respect me," or "You do not care about me," we are projecting what we believe to be true of the other onto him or her, and if they disagree with our assessment, all we have is an argument that no one will ever win. If we are successful in identifying specific behaviors and getting agreement about the changes required, it is important then to let it go. If someone makes the effort to change the behavior, we need to give credit for that and refrain from throwing the old behavior back in their face. There is nothing that can be done to change the past, and using it as ammunition will only escalate a current argument. It is hard to move forward if we are dragging along all the baggage from the past. This will inevitably happen if all requests to change behaviors have been ignored. A good relationship, whether personal or professional, involves listening to one another and being willing to make adjustments that serve the good of all.
Now, in the end, let us summarize what we have learned in this lecture. Conflict is a characteristic of human existence. It is part of the dynamic of life that drives us into the future. Few international humanitarian law topics are proving as problematic in modern warfare as classification of conflict. That is, the identification of the type of conflict to which particular hostilities amount as a matter of law. Terrorist attacks disproportionately target civilians in hitherto sacrosanct locations such as schools, hospitals, and other public spaces. International humanitarian law is built on 2 fundamental concepts. One is the separation of combatants from civilians, and the second is the doctrine of proportionality in the use of force. Evidence points to the fact that the widespread and ready availability of small arms and light weapons fuels and exacerbates conflict.